Ready to jump, Captain. The statement brought Captain Alex Gardner back to the present. He had been playing out the last 11 months in his head, wondering if they'd missed anything. No, but their sensor limitations made him question even that. Not his crew, they were the best of the best, but the UEF Shepherd was on the edge of their technology, prone to going just a little too far at times, outpacing its safety limits. But here they were. Make the FTL jump, Commander. Commander Klaan made the standard announcement to the ship. FTL jumps were pretty common by now, but felt unsettling if you weren't prepared. Some crew members said they felt stretched out, which was technically accurate but not a good description. The ship darkened a moment due to the power drain while the FTL engines fired up. A moment later, they had covered a massive distance that would have taken several years in the old colony ships. The colony ships were so hastily made and haphazardly launched that there really was no guarantee they'd find one, let alone the dozens they expected to be out here. Many carried limited or outdated communication. Few had locator beacons. The Shepherd, the first FTL ship to launch from Earth, skipped along with short jumps, then spent days or weeks scanning as far as they could with their limited sensors. It was slow and tedious. Captain Gardner moved to the scanner station with Commander Klaan. Start a standard search pattern. They studied the map layout ahead of them. How far to Proxima Centauri? Commander Klaan did some calculations, checking numbers and formulas. A little over 3 light years. Captain Gardner grimaced. It's taking so long. Commander Klaan turned to face him. They'd had this discussion before, so they both knew the response. Our sensors can't scan during a jump, so we have to... Captain Gardner sighed and cut him off. I know, and we must be thorough. It's just... In turn, Commander Klaan cut him off. You're impatient. The captain responded defensively. I want to see results. They'd traveled a full light year and had not seen any sign of a colony ship. Not that they expected one this close, but it was still discouraging. Their mission was to track and locate any colony ships launched from Earth in the past 40 years. None should have reached Proxima Centauri yet. Captain, I believe we have found 2 ships? Commander Klaan looked at the captain as a restrained excitement spread across the bridge. Mr. Klaan, send coordinates to navigation. Pilot, best speed. 2 hours later, the Shepherd had reached their destination. As an image came on the monitor screens, Commander Klaan let out a quick breath. Gardner moved to a screen. Commander? Klaan studied his monitor. Sir, one appears to be a cargo section from a colony ship. It's dead in space. The other appears to be... alien? The entire bridge crew looked at each other. Although the possibility of first contact was on everyone's mind, no one really expected to find actual aliens. There was still no indication they even existed, let alone frequented this part of the galaxy. After a moment of stunned silence, Captain Gardner jumped up. Okay, people, first contact protocols. Let's go. Open all channels. Charge forward repelling plating. Let's hope they're friendly. Despite a flurry of activity, it was deathly silent on the bridge. Gardner and Klaan moved to a communication station and Klaan began looking at signals. Sir, from what I can tell, the cargo section was cut loose. It's partially empty. Maybe the ship had an automated repair protocol? He was interrupted by a signal from the comm station. Gardner looked at him expectantly. It seems to be a signal from the other ship. I'll see if I can connect. After a moment, an image appeared on the screen. They were greeted by their very first vision of an alien. A thin, humanoid shape with a round head, dark skin thick like leather, and an expression that seemed to show no emotion. Facial features similar to human, but spread out and a little less defined. A garbled string of words came through with a computer voice seemingly translating words to English that didn't make any sense. Right, shine, greet, loop, talk. Sir, our translator is trying. We never expected to use this. It's only ever used Earth languages. They looked at each other. Greet? Talk? Gardner asked, and Klaan nodded. Captain Gardner faced the camera and spoke slowly. Hello. I am Captain Alex Gardner of the United Earth Federation ship Shepherd. We are on a mission looking for ships launched from our planet before we had FTL capabilities. He waited. More garble was heard as the alien waited patiently. The alien spoke with what appeared to be a smile. It was hard to tell as he had no lips, so the smile was simply a wide expression. Finally, he looked to the side and spoke again, the computer speaking over alien words. I am Captain Sasson. Translate. Have more talk. Klaan looked at the captain. They probably need more speech from us to learn the language. I can send the histories that we have on file. Do it. Captain Gardner turned back to Sasson. Captain, we are sending several audio and video files that detail our recent history, if that will help. Captain Sasson waved his hands toward him and looked off to the side while holding up both hands, seemingly asking them to wait. Finally, he spoke, the translator working much better. Captain Gardner. Again, I am Captain Sasson of the Klaan Collective. We understand you are looking for ships that launched without FTL. Generation ships or hibernation ships? Hibernation. We developed FTL shortly after the last ship left, and we're going to try to find them. They were not the best quality at times, hastily launched and built. Sasson looked curiously. According to these histories you sent, your planet was in a worldwide war, and people feared they would perish? Captain Gardner took a deep breath, realizing that Earth's last 100 years were not particularly impressive beyond the last 30 or so. Yes, Captain, it was a dark time. We hope that they may choose to return with us to Earth to continue rebuilding our world. Captain Sasson held up a hand again as someone spoke, then faced them. Captain Gardner, where were these ships headed? Gardner pulled up a visual detailing the sector. He pointed to Earth, then to the Alpha Centauri system. This is Earth. They were headed here, the nearest star system to ours. Sasson nodded. Your files indicate you have the FTL capabilities to jump there. Why are you so far away? Gardner nodded. We can jump, but our sensors are limited. Also, our navigation is experimental, so we've been doing smaller jumps for the last 11 months. Captain Sasson waited for another translation, then seemingly laughed, a sort of musical cough and grunt. You are moving so slow, but I understand. If these colony ships were poorly built, they may be off course. I assume this is a part of one of your ships? Gardner nodded. So it would seem. We're not sure why it was ejected. Captain Sasson listened again to someone off screen, then resumed. Captain, we rarely visit this quadrant. You are the first FTL-capable species here, and from what we can tell, possibly the only sentient species for hundreds of light units. The translator buzzed, then repeated. Light years. Sasson continued. We have scanned this ship. There is a substantial amount of an intriguing material. Some sort of organic originated polymer in various shapes and sizes. Gardner looked at Klaan, who shrugged and guessed. Plastic? There would be a lot of it from that time, and if they cleared out necessities, they may have left some behind. Gardner faced Sasson again. Yes, I believe you're referring to what we call plastic. It's made from petroleum at a base level, which I suppose has an organic origination point. Sasson waited, reading something. Petroleum. Interesting. We will study that in your library. I see you have a section on your planet. Substantial water, oxygen and nitrogen atmosphere, fascinating. Extensive volcanic and seismic activity. Gardner and Klaan looked moderately surprised. Also extensive predators among your fauna. How unusual. You... Sasson tested the word directly without the translator. Humans must be resilient. Your world is intriguing. Gardner spoke. We'd be happy to share more information if you'd like. Sasson nodded. Yes, we've already copied more of your history files. We will study them. Klaan looked at his monitor, realizing the aliens had indeed been scanning their archives. Sasson continued. In the meantime, I have an offer for you. Gardner looked at Klaan and they both looked forward. Yes, Captain, what is that? Sasson gestured a crew member on screen. This is Lieutenant Bren. He currently serves in our diplomatic corps. We are on our way to a meeting with another member of our collective, and will be gone for several months before we come back this way. If you would allow us to take the contents of this cargo ship with its plastic, I would like to assign Lieutenant Bren to your ship until we return. My science officer assures me that our species share similar survival needs: oxygen, sustenance, basic physiology. Mr. Bren can assist you with your sensors to better detect your colony ships, and we can learn more from each other. Sasson smiled. A diplomatic exchange? Gardner looked at Klaan, who shrugged. Protocols state that first contact should involve learning whatever we can. Gardner nodded. Captain Sasson and Lieutenant Bren, we would gladly welcome the lieutenant on our ship. Please send along any information that you can, and we will treat him as an ambassador. Sasson laughed his guttural laugh. Without warning, Lieutenant Bren and a few large cases materialized on the bridge. A stunned Captain Gardner greeted him. Bren spoke to the captain in perfect English. Captain, I am happy to be here. Pardon the quick transport, but I'm afraid our ship is in a hurry, as we dropped out of FTL to investigate this ship. As he spoke, Klaan motioned to the captain, and they watched as the Klaan ship pulled the colony ship section into a launch bay and disappeared. Lieutenant Bren smiled the strange, wide smile and pointed at the sensor station. May I take a look? Gardner, still a bit put off by Bren's sudden appearance, gestured at his cases. Would you like to see where you'll be staying? Perhaps unpack and get a quick tour of the ship? Bren waved his hands down. No, thank you. That can wait. Let's see if we can improve your sensor range. Klaan led him to the sensor station. I am Commander Klaan, first officer here. If there's anything you need, please ask. How are you able to speak our language? Bren produced a small data device from his jacket and began scanning. I have an implant. As a member of the Diplomatic Corps, I am required to speak clearly in many languages. I loaded your new language protocols before coming aboard. He grunted. Your carrier waves are extremely inefficient. Have you not developed FTL communications? Klaan looked at Gardner, who shrugged. No, we haven't. Klaan looked on as Bren's device caused the sensor screen to jump. Klaan's eyes widened as he began to receive notifications. That should be helpful. Klaan looked on as new data began appearing on screen. What did you do? Bren was scanning the workstation. I compressed your carrier waves. Although digital waves carry a small footprint, ultimately they are harder to compress, so I converted them to analog for the travel protocols. Analog waves can be compressed without as much data loss. He stopped and turned to Gardner. Forgive me, Captain. I just made a substantial upgrade to your systems without asking. If you would like to confine me to quarters, I will understand. Captain Gardner smiled and looked at Klaan, who was excitedly opening files. Sir, our normal automated pings to Earth are arriving in near real time. I've already received a return ping. No more month-long delays. Captain Gardner turned to Lieutenant Bren. Lieutenant Bren, while I would expect you to ask next time, there is no need for any reprimand. You've given us a great gift. Lieutenant Bren looked quite relieved. Thank you, sir. I could have lost my commission for such an insubordinate act on my ship. It was a simple fix, therefore it didn't occur to me that it was a major change. Gardner was interrupted by an excited shout from Klaan. Captain, I found one! He pointed at a map with a small flashing dot. 4 hours travel from here at maximum sublight. Sending coordinates to navigation. It would have been a week before we searched that sector. Gardner turned to Bren. It looks like your help is already paying off. Lieutenant Bren's skin darkened to an almost black color, and he smiled his wide smile. Captain, I am so gratified. I must tell you it was my suggestion that I come here. I was so impressed that you would go looking for your people. Most races in the collective send out colony ships, and if they don't hear from them, they simply consider them a loss. We have almost 1 trillion people on over 90 planets. Gardner nodded as he indicated to the navigator to depart. Bren continued, especially in this ship with this technology. He laughed, then noticed Gardner and Klaan looking at him curiously. I apologize. I meant no offense. It's just that your ship has FTL without all the support systems that FTL usually requires. I don't even understand your jump technology. You just hurl yourselves across space, not knowing exactly where you'll land or what you've passed through. He smiled. You're fearless, Gardner smiled. Yes, fearless, I suppose. Commander, would you give Lieutenant Bren a quick tour and assign him quarters? See to any of his needs. Bren nodded. Thank you, Captain. And again, apologies for my insubordination. I assure you it won't happen again. Gardner nodded as Bren and Klaan picked up Bren's cases and left the bridge. Gardner returned to his chair to look over the navigational plans, wondering what they'd find when they arrived. As Bren and Klaan moved through the ship, Bren fired questions as fast as Klaan could answer. What do you eat? Klaan paused. We carry stocks of preserved foods, and we recycle water and food byproducts. Essentially, we make a base that contains all of our needed nutrients, then flavor it so it's palatable. Bren nodded. You reconstitute your waste. Efficient. I can offer some help there. He looked at his data device. We scanned your ship. Aside from the propeller guns, do you have other weapons? Klaan thought a moment. I'm not sure how much I can tell you. We have the rail guns, and we do carry some other types of weapons, but we are not a warship. Most of our ship is empty space so that we can carry refugees and supplies. Bren nodded. What if your refugees don't want to return home? Klaan tilted his head. We did anticipate that. If they have the means to survive, we will take them to Proxima Centauri. But I'm hoping they return to Earth. We came very close to destroying Earth. Our population was cut down substantially. In a way, we need them back. As two women passed, Bren turned curiously to Klaan. It appears you have genders. How many? Klaan responded. 2 primary genders with some variations. Bren looked surprised. Only 2? Klaan nodded as Bren continued. Your logs say these ships had a maximum speed of around 5% light speed. That means it would take them just over 87 of your years to get there. Would any have arrived? I see no record of any launch information in your histories. Klaan was relieved to reach Bren's room. Unfortunately, due to the war, records were either lost or never filed. We only know the first few ships which began leaving 40 years ago. Klaan gestured into the simple quarters. Here we are, Lieutenant. Bren nodded. One more question. Well, 2, if I may. Klaan forced a smile. The histories state that the Mars accident of 2067 effectively ended the wars. Can you elaborate? Klaan hesitated. If that's a difficult subject, you can direct me to any histories I could read, Commander. Bren waited. Finally, Klaan spoke. The frequency of colony ship launches became overwhelming. Many countries had descended into anarchy, and if a group could get a ship together, they would just leave. Many left with untested systems, limited supplies. Fuel was becoming scarce, but many people felt that our world was nearing its end. They were desperate. In 2067, the largest ship ever carried 16,000 people into space. As it circled Mars, waiting for its launch window, something failed and the ship crashed into a station on Mars. Bren was surprised to see Klaan's emotional display. He shifted uncomfortably until Klaan composed himself. We don't know who was on the ship. We don't know if the ship had a name, even. We only know there were 16,000 people, humans, who were so afraid of our own destructive nature that jumping into a giant tin can and, as you put it, hurling themselves into space seemed a reasonable choice. There was silence as Bren waited. He continued. The accident made us realize what was happening and changed the course of our history. Bren examined Klaan's reaction. He could see that humans carried empathy for their fellow humans of a type that he had never experienced. Caring for others was mostly a matter of efficiency. Everyone dies, and while it was sad to lose a comrade, it was more difficult to replace a pilot or comms officer. Finally, Klaan spoke. And the second question? Bren was almost startled, taking a moment to remember. Ah, yes. Would it be acceptable to send written communications to my captain? He asked for full reports if possible. Klaan smiled at his observance of protocol, something that was far more relaxed on the Shepherd. Yes, of course. I will show you how to use the computers and send you a communication regarding our duty schedules. I assume you'll want to work on the same schedule as the captain and me. Bren smiled again. Yes, please. I am looking forward to your food. I have brought some of my own. Perhaps we can share some of our favorites? Klaan laughed. I don't have any favorites on the ship. I eat simply because I must. He leaned in close to Bren. It tastes like shit. He laughed heartily, and after realizing the joke, Bren joined him. Bren sat down at his workstation, looking at the controls. He had already unpacked the few personal items he carried and set out some small machines and devices, as well as explored the quarters. He was fascinated that a military transport had what appeared to be artwork on the walls. He also used his implant for a refresh session, where he learned the human word nap. He required a minimum of 1 unit per day and had taken twice that time. He noted that humans apparently slept 3 to 4 times more every cycle, or day. Using his own device, he managed to interface with the human workstation and connected to the communication program. He spoke into his device as the words appeared on the screen. Dictate report. Lieutenant Bren, temporary assignment, UEF Shepherd. 2. Captain Sasson, KCC Victory. Captain, my first few hours on the Shepherd have been fruitful. I was able to upgrade their communications capabilities, and they believe they've found their first colony ship. The crew calls them strays, something to do with the human practice of domesticating animals as companions. The humans are fascinating. They seem to have great empathy, perhaps even love for everyone. Commander Klaan got emotional when discussing the Mars accident that brought about the end of the last war. While emotions are typically a liability when unchecked, as was the case with the Banez people, for the humans, I believe it is their strength. They truly care. Their emotions, while deep, don't seem to be incapacitating. It is a sign of that empathy and love that they are willing to travel in this ship. Somehow it is functioning perfectly, despite the unbalanced nature of the systems. Bren paused to rub his throat, finding the pressure point that relaxes a Klaan. I do think we will need to watch them. I do not think that they are dangerous, but they are decidedly reckless and naive. I am still surprised that they have not only invited me to their ship, but actually left me alone for several units. I am not under guard or any substantial restrictions. I tested their protocols, and they seem willing to set aside rules if the benefit is worthwhile. I do not believe they are near being ready to apply for membership in the collective, but I don't believe we can leave them to their own designs. They went from 5% light speed to FTL technology in about a third of the time that most races do. They figured it out so fast that other technologies are simply not ready for space travel. They did this as they were determined to save their strays. It's truly impressive and a little ridiculous. Bren looked at the screen and realized he couldn't read it. He had left his translator in human language mode. He let out a string of expletives that mostly translated into pops and buzzes. He pushed a few buttons on his device and the letters garbled into characters he knew on the big screen by the desk. After a moment, he was satisfied. He was about to start again when a buzz came over a speaker and Captain Gardner's voice piped in. Lieutenant Bren, please report to the bridge. Bren arrived on the bridge as Klaan and Gardner looked at a view screen. Sir? Gardner turned. Lieutenant, thought you'd want to see this. On the screen was a ship. It was unlike any ship that Bren had seen. It was a long cylinder with a blunted nose. There were engines on each end, and aside from that, nothing much to look at. The outer hull was a mismatched patchwork of different metals and colors. "Captain, is this one of yours?" Gardner nodded as Klaan provided an answer. "I see no markings, and the hull is a haphazard mix of titanium, steel, and aluminum. The ship appears to be intact and undamaged. However, it is off course." Bren looked over his shoulder and chimed in. "They will not reach the Alpha Centauri system on their current trajectory." Bren had a sudden thought. "Did your people know that there was a habitable planet around Proxima?" Klaan nodded. "We did, although we didn't know exact atmospheric conditions. The second planet is in the habitable zone and appears to have water, oxygen, and similar gravity to Earth. But that's all we knew back then. Now we know it is uninhabited, and there do seem to be areas where humans could survive. Resources are scarce, but the Strays knew that going in. It was a long shot." Klaan trailed off as the computer beeped. "Wait. I am reading an oxygen atmosphere inside the ship. Breathable." Klaan looked at Bren. "Is this what I believe it is?" Bren looked. "Life signs. 4 life signs." Gardner exhaled sharply. "Only 4? Bren touched a few buttons. 423 hibernation modules, intact and functioning. 4 conscious life signs." Klaan looked at Gardner curiously. 4 people are awake." Gardner paced, looking at the ship. "Can you hail them?" Klaan nodded. "I have, but they may have shut down their comms. There's no reason to believe they'd need them." They were interrupted by another beep. "Sir, I'm getting a radio signal." "Radio?" Gardner repeated. They all stood still as audio crunched into the bridge, scratchy and weak.
"This is a distress call. This is Earthship New Denver. We are en route to Proxima Centauri, but have drifted off course. We've spent as much fuel as we can, but have not fully corrected. If you can assist, please send a visual signal to the front of the ship where there is a small window. This is an automated repeating signal."
More static, then silence. "Find that window, Lieutenant Jeffries," Gardner excitedly directed the ship's pilot. She nodded and moved the ship slowly as Klaan and Bren looked for a window. Bren saw it first. "There?" Klaan agreed. "That's it. Full stop, Lieutenant." The ship came face to face with the top of the New Denver, looking at 2 small portals. The bridge crew stood silently. Gardner thought out loud. "How do we get their attention?" Bren asked. "Can you signal with a light?" Gardner and Klaan exchanged a look as Gardner turned back to Bren. "We left without installing the lights. We haven't needed them, and so they are still in the maintenance section." Suddenly, Klaan jumped up. "We can hit them with a grappler." Bren looked confused, but Klaan continued. "That ship has minimal shielding. Like a submarine, a noise would echo throughout the ship." Gardner nodded excitedly. "Commander, prepare the grappler. Jeffries, ease up into range." Everyone rushed to their assigned stations, and after a few minutes were ready. Captain Gardner sat in front of a view screen. "Commander, knock on the door. Gently. Let's not punch a hole." Klaan nodded. "I have identified a reinforced titanium section. It should be fine, and hopefully loud." "Proceed," said Gardner. They waited in anticipation, eyes glued to the monitors. The grappler moved to the New Denver and bounced off the front of the ship. Klaan retracted it and waited. And waited. And waited. Minutes went by and Klaan asked, "Another knock, sir?" Gardner was about to answer when Lieutenant Jeffries squealed, "Light!" Everyone looked to see a small light flashing from inside a portal. It was making a pattern, 3 short flashes, 3 long, then 3 short. After a moment, it repeated. Gardner recognized the pattern. Morse code. Klaan added, SOS. Bren looked confused. "It's a distress call." Captain Gardner moved to Bren's station. "How do we reply?" There was thoughtful silence until Gardner joked, "Anybody got a flashlight?" Klaan laughed as Bren piped in. Captain, you have magnetized shielding on the front of the ship, correct? Gardner nodded. Will it hold an electrical charge? Klaan looked curiously and nodded. It should, but why? Bren moved to a workstation. This area has a high concentration of a type of dust that can be luminous when charged. It is typically harmless, but if we could apply an electrical charge to the front of the ship, we may be able to create a bit of incandescence. Not enough to direct a beam of light, but enough to show that we heard their message, perhaps. It should look unusual. Gardner smiled at Bren. Do it. Bren made some calculations, then flipped a switch. An external camera showed a slight, colorful glow on the front of the ship. A multicolored, shimmering cloud. Not bright, but noticeable. If we turn the charge on and off, could we do quick flashes like they did? Bren looked. Perhaps a few. The dust is losing its luminosity. Gardner looked around. What do we send? Something short? Klaan suggested. Earth. Gardner pointed at him as he took Bren's seat. He thought for a moment, then began switching the charge on and off. They waited. After a moment, the light on the New Denver came back on, waving excitedly back and forth before making circles, then pointing towards the nearest side to the portal. Gardner stood up and flipped on a communicator. Colony Rescue Team 1, please report to Airlock 2. He then turned to Jeffries. Lieutenant, put the forward airlock up against whatever door or hatch they were pointing at. Mr. Klaan, let's install those lights. Soon? Gardner nodded at Bren. You coming? Bren jumped excitedly, then stopped. Do you think it's wise to have me there? Their first sight of an alien? Klaan laughed. Our first alien was just a few hours ago. They'll be fine. Plus, they may want to thank you. Your upgrade found them. Bren smiled his wide smile and followed them. The rescue team was waiting as the three arrived from the bridge. They looked excitedly at Bren. Gardner realized not everyone had seen him. Okay, folks, we can make formal introductions later, but this is Lieutenant Bren of the Klaan Collective. Bren raised his hands and spoke, Greetings. I look forward to working with you all. The rescue team were in pressurized suits, and the captain and commander began putting theirs on. Bren looked a little uncomfortable. Captain, I've not worn a pressure suit for many cycles. I'm not sure how these work. One of the rescue team looked him over quickly and directed him in donning the suit. He explained the functions. Gardner tapped on his helmet. Can you all hear me? Everyone but Bren nodded. Klaan reached over and pushed a button on his arm. How about now? Bren nodded. The rescue team approached the airlock and investigated the small tunnel. Once the entire team was in the lock, they closed the door. The captain nodded, and there was a slight thump as the airlock repressurized. The team lead approached the connection to the New Denver. There was a circular port with a few mechanisms. She looked at the captain again when she heard a tapping from inside the New Denver. Commander Klaan spoke up. Morse code again. Safe. Open. One of the levers jiggled, then jiggled again. The team leader grabbed it and pulled. It didn't move at first, but then slowly flipped up and the door popped out a few centimeters. There was a seal, and as a vent of air drifted out, the seal separated and the door pushed open. The Shepherd team were face to face, or helmet to helmet, with someone in an older pressure suit. The visor was dull, but human features could be made out, and they excitedly waved everyone inside the New Denver. After everyone crammed into the airlock, the New Denver passenger pulled the airlock closed. They pushed a button, and the airlock balanced its pressure. They crammed into the small area until the inner door opened. 3 more humans stood inside the next room. They were a bit ragged, but seemingly healthy. All 3 were smiling and barely able to contain themselves. The Shepherd team pulled off their helmets, and Gardner held Bren from removing his, holding up a hand. He faced the group. Hello, I am Captain Alex Gardner of the... He paused, speaking slowly for emphasis. United Earth Federation. He let it sink in. The woman in front spoke immediately. Captain, we are so unbelievably excited to see you. I'm the mayor of New Denver. She looked at the others. Temporarily. The others shook their heads. She continued, My name is Carolyn Gilmore. Are you able to help us? Did you receive our message? Wait, how did you catch up to us? Gardner held out a hand for a handshake, greeting her. Miss Gilmore, she interrupted. Carolyn, please. Gardner nodded and continued. Carolyn, we have a lot to tell you, but first, I need to introduce you to someone. He nodded to Bren, who removed his helmet and smiled even wider than usual. This is Lieutenant Bren. He is an ambassador from the Klaan Collective, and he is the one who helped us find you. Bren held up his hands as the 4 colonists grinned in excitement. Gardner continued. We are from a different Earth than when you left. We've developed faster-than-light travel, and we are the first Earth ship with FTL. Our mission is to collect our strays and bring them home. The 4 colonists looked at each other and breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Carolyn exhaled. Captain, you have no idea how happy that makes me. The other 3 men approached the Shepherd team and pulled them into hugs and embraces. Carolyn looked at Bren. Mr. Bren, it is so exciting to meet you. She turned to the captain. We had detected evidence of another ship a while back, but we couldn't communicate with them. They may have seen us as space junk. We have torn apart our comms to keep other systems going. When we drifted off course, we were awakened from hibernation. In our attempt to course correct, we realized that we couldn't do enough. So we decided to remain awake and limit energy usage. We cannibalize systems to keep life support functioning, but we won't survive the whole trip, especially not on this course. Gardner looked at her. You were hoping to figure something out? Another man spoke, his beard and hair the scraggliest of them. We were working on a solar sail. We have most of what we need, but Klaan finished for him. No way to install it. The man nodded. I'm Tom Smith. I was an engineer on Earth. I built the majority of this ship. Klaan looked again. Was this a missile? Smith grinned. 3 of them. Carolyn looked at Gardner. Do you have mag boots? Gardner nodded and the Shepherd crew flipped a switch on their suits. Klaan showed Bren where the button was, and their feet clicked down to the deck. They hadn't realized they were weightless as there wasn't room to move. Smith stuck his head back into the space. Come on, folks. Come see my ship. Smith led the group through a small series of hallways before reaching the main part of the ship. As the Shepherd crew entered the cargo space, they all looked shocked. Smith squeezed out in front of them. We managed to fit everything in. Indeed, the main cargo hold, while efficiently organized, still looked like a haphazard crush of hibernation chambers and cargo containers. No space was wasted. Every square centimeter had something in it. Smith continued, 430 sleep pods and enough supplies for a year. We planned to cannibalize the ship after we touched down. Klaan was taking it in. Parachutes? Smith nodded. 6 on each end, which should allow for a side landing. There are emergency ports on all sides, so we don't land on the only exit. Bren was scanning with his device. Your oxygen mixture is low. Carolyn spoke up. We are running on minimal oxygen, recycling as much as possible. We were supposed to be asleep until we reached Proxima. We had to adapt. Bren was curious. According to my readings, you would run out before reaching the planet at this rate. The 4 looked at each other, silently acknowledging what they already knew. Gardner broke the uncomfortable silence. Yes, well, it doesn't matter now. We are here, so there will be oxygen for all. Carolyn smiled. We agreed that 2 of us would go back to hibernation soon, hopefully after correcting our course. It was still being figured out. Smith turned to the Shepherd crew. Do you have the capability to transfer the hibernation pods as they are now? Klaan responded, No. We will have to wake everyone up. Smith exhaled sharply. That will take some time. As you can see, they are packed tight in here. But I suppose we can get rolling. Gardner indicated the rescue team leader. This is Lieutenant Chen. She is the leader of the rescue team. We have plenty of people to assist, and we can get this process moving. Carolyn, could I speak to you? Gardner and Carolyn moved aside as Chen began discussing the process with Smith and the others. Carolyn, we are hoping that you will all come back to Earth with us. While we have made great strides, we have substantial work still to do, and we want to bring everyone home. What are your thoughts? Carolyn stepped into a small nook. Captain, I know that some folks here will want to go on to Proxima, but I really don't think it will be the majority opinion. We are undersupplied and off course. We were in for a serious hard time going to Proxima. If we were unable to find other colonists, we might not have made it. Gardner nodded as she continued. I don't know what it's like now, but Captain, we really thought it was over. Earth was dying. Another 5 years would have been irreversible. It was a lousy choice. Gardner nodded. When did you leave? She rattled off the date easily. June 24th, 2067. We managed to get ahead of the behemoth at the SpaceX Texas station. Gardner furrowed his brow. The behemoth? Carolyn nodded. That wasn't its name, but it was a damn behemoth. It was enormous, and they were having trouble finding enough fuel. They offered to take us with them if we'd give them our fuel, but that ship seemed troublesome. We declined and skipped them in line. Gardner sighed. I believe that was the right decision. It sounds like that ship ended the war. Carolyn looked confused. Gardner continued. In August, the behemoth launched, and a few weeks later it crashed into Mars, killing 16,000 people. It caused the world to take a step back. A ceasefire was called for mourning, and that was the end of hostilities. Carolyn looked shocked. Still feels like a few weeks ago, but it was... How many years ago was that? Gardner moved next to her. 33 years ago. It's 2100 now. We've been looking for you and the others for the last 11 months. Carolyn thought a moment, taking it all in. Gardner moved towards the cargo area. But there will be time for all of that. We have detailed audio and video histories of the last 40 years that you and your people can catch up on. The progress we've made is remarkable. I'm not sure who you have on board, but it's important to note that Earth is now a unified federation. There are no more hostilities between nations or tribes. The Mars tragedy served as a wake-up call, a catalyst for our future unity. When Carolyn and Gardner returned to the cargo area, the rescue team and New Denver crew had already awakened around 25 passengers who were in the reorientation process, coming to and taking in their surroundings. Bren was attempting to help, but he was the main attraction, and people circled him, firing off questions and treating him like a celebrity. As soon as Klaan or Smith would shoo them away, another group would come up. Bren was smiling. It didn't seem to bother him. Gardner approached Chen. Lieutenant, moving quickly, I see. Chen grinned. Mr. Smith is on top of it. He has charts and protocols, and we should have everyone awake within the day. Gardner nodded in approval. Unfortunately, Captain, it will take longer to retrieve the supplies. Gardner nodded. Well, we will retrieve as much as we can, but if the colonists return to Earth, the supplies won't be necessary. Smith had just returned and heard the last comment. Earth? We can go back? I figured it'd be a dead planet. Any survivors would live on the moon stations or Mars. Gardner smiled. Mr. Smith, the engineering progress of the last 30 years has been remarkable. You'll be impressed. Captain, Smith asked quietly, did any cities survive? Denver? Another voice chimed in. What about Paris? Gardner held up his hands. Folks, there will be a time for answers to all these questions. For now, let's get everyone up and over to the Shepherd. He turned to Smith, winked, and nodded with a thumbs up. Then asked, what was your profession on Earth? I assume an engineer, but... Smith smiled. I was a general in the Canadian Space Exploration Force. Gardner looked surprised. Yes, I was a general, but in name only, because I led the stellar exploration projects. I was not a military man. Once I saw what was happening, I began planning the New Denver. Gardner smiled. So I don't have to salute? Smith laughed. I was an engineer. Nobody saluted me. I avoided my uniform whenever possible. Gardner continued. Why Denver? You're Canadian? Smith smiled wide. My wife is from Denver. I think you'll be able to meet her and my son within the hour. Gardner smiled and turned to Chen. Lieutenant, do you have what you need? Chen nodded. Yes, sir. Permission to bring cargo teams over? Gardner nodded. Proceed. The rest of you, you don't need to be here. Come with me. Carolyn and one of the other colonists followed Gardner. Klaan turned to follow, but noticed Bren deep in thought. Lieutenant, coming back to the ship? Bren exhaled and turned. Yes, Commander. He was visibly affected by the experience. Are you all right, Mr. Bren? Bren nodded, wiping away moisture from his eyes and nose area. I am surprisingly moved by this experience. Klaan nodded. Our first rescue, and it's thanks to you. Bren smiled, trying to decide if he would share his analysis that the new Denver would have run out of oxygen in mere weeks, while still decades from their destination. Back in his quarters hours later, Bren continued his letter to Captain Sasson. Captain, we've completed our first rescue operation. The ship was named New Denver after a city on Earth. There were 427 surviving passengers. 3 had perished during the flight. The ship was remarkable, a conglomeration of 3 weapons, guided missiles that were originally loaded with nuclear fusion devices. Aside from the propeller guns, which they call rail guns, they have other weapons, perhaps nuclear, but have not shared details with me. I do not believe they have a large supply. They have no energy weapons, and as we saw initially, no energy dispersion shielding. Their compassion and absolute commitment to each other is remarkable. The colonists and the Shepherd crew are acting as if they are all tribal family. This despite just meeting for the first time, and just over 30 years from a worldwide war. They call it World War III, so not the first large-scale conflict, but their first war to feature such destruction. This war yielded hundreds of nuclear fusion detonations. Prior to this war, only 2 nuclear devices had been detonated in a war. Bren read through some of the words before continuing. Tonight, the captain is hosting a celebration for finding their first strays, who have already unanimously agreed to return to Earth. I am to be an honored guest, surprisingly. Bren grinned, then closed down his smile. Of course, I will remain focused and continue my mission. However, Captain, I must admit that I am enjoying the company of these humans. At the party tonight, the captain has said that I will learn about an Earth entertainment, a fictional narrative video known as a movie, as well as a pastime known as bowling. There was a beep indicating a visitor, and Bren pushed a button to release the door. Gardner, Klaan, Carolyn, and Smith stood outside. Bren noticed that Smith's hair on his head and face had been cut short. As they stood waiting, another woman and a young child joined them, presumably Smith's family. Ready, Mr. Bren? The captain smiled warmly. Yes, sir. One moment, please. Bren looked over his device, nodded, and sent the message. He smiled his wide smile and followed them toward the celebration.